Good morning. My name is Scott Lee. I'm alcoholic.
Hi, Scott.
I moved almost to tears to be here. What a gift. What an absolute gift. Lois Wilson said in the moment of silence she invited God to the meeting. I'm going to ask you to do that. And we're going to do something a little bit unusual. We're going to very slowly whisper the Serenity Prayer. Very, very slowly. And so let's take a couple of moments and acknowledge the presence of deity. Serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's a different thing. You feel the pressure going out of the room? I did, yeah. So anyway, thanks for coming. We're glad to see you. You're the hardcore. You're the ones that fish the cigarette butts out of the drinks the next morning to kind of take the edge off. These are my people. You're the nose pukers. These are my folks. These are the ones that quit over 1,000 times. Yeah. So we're gonna begin talking about step 4 this morning. It is my passion because for me, I got more personal change and growth from this particular step than any other. So it has made it my passion. And for those who have not actually done a 4-step, it is probably the easiest of all the steps. There's not going to be any surprises like you were there, okay? So we're not going to find something you don't know. There's nothing really to be afraid of here. And I think Don was the one that said this, that all that garbage in my past is not who I am. That's who I'm not. Because if that's who I really am, I'm still out there doing it. It doesn't make me sick to think about it. What we will teach me here is how to quit doing who I'm not, how to repair the damage for having done who I'm not, and who I really am will emerge from the ashes like the phoenix. And that's not prose, it's fact. That's our experience. That's what happens. And I'm going to turn it over to John and let him get started on 4. And we're just going to kind of bat it back and forth. We make this up at the breaks. We don't have a format here. We invite God in, and we believe He takes over. And so we're going to do whatever moves us. John?
Good morning, John Edmonds, alcoholic.
Hey, John.
I don't think you had to tell them that we didn't have a format. They probably figured that out by themselves.
I thought we looked pretty good.
Well, you are a good salesman. I love this part of the work. And I'm just amazed that I even just said that. I avoided this work for as long as humanly possible until the bitter end. In treatment, they gave me what they called a 4-step. It was an inventory of sorts, but it was not the 4-step that we described in here. Now, early in recovery, when a 4-step meeting would break out, I wouldn't hesitate to share with you what I thought the 4-step was, even though I really hadn't taken it out of this book. And for a long time, I thought, I'd just done it. And a couple years later, came back and I had this sponsor. I'll back up a little bit. His name was Charles. I talked to you briefly about him. Whenever I would call him with the crisis of the day, my rent, my girl, my whatever, he'd say, John, my experiences when I worked the 4-step by the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, my life got a whole lot better. And I say, yeah, I know, but what am I going to do? My light payments due, or whatever it is. And he wasn't the type of guy that would really guide you through the work. And so finally I had enough pain. As I told you, my first wife left, and so I went out to do this 4-step by myself out of the book, and really struggled, because I have to have a guide in this process. I am so ADD, I'll start reading these instructions, and I just get lost. Rarely have we seen a person fail. Man, she's hot. What's for dinner? It's impossible to find the instructions. I have to have a guide, and so if you don't have a sponsor, I pray that you're on the way to getting one, because it's an awfully painful process without one. And finally, as I told you last night, and crashed and burned my life and surrendered to this process, I just kind of made this deal with God in the program, like I'm just gonna do exactly what this nonsense talks about, and I'm really going to prove it wrong, and when it's wrong, then I'm just going to blow my brains out. And thank goodness it proved to be true. As I mentioned, a million times last night, all of this work is designed to remove what's blocking us. And that's what this next instruction, this next part of the reading really says. Scott likes to talk about there's in where I got sober, right outside of Washington, D.C., very kind of therapeutic type of recovery, very kind of, they're smart people, right, in Washington, D.C., or they think they are. And, so it's very kind of intellectual, therapeutic type recovery. And I know that's a broad brush I'm using, but, they would say back in the late 80s and early 90s, don't rush into the fourth step, as though you might uncover something that you didn't know was there. And really, it was really kind of a scary thing. Like, you could go back to drinking if you take this step too early. And it's just the worst advice I'd ever heard, And I had this sponsor that said, don't worry, John, we're just taking a Polaroid of your life and then we're going to look at it together. I was like, that was enough to scare me away for a good bit of time. But having a guy that just walks me through this and say, hey, look, that's an instruction, let's underline it, let's do it one step at a time, changed my life. And that's what we're going to do today. And I beg of you, even if you've done it even if you're a big book extraordinaire and you know what page 37 says from top to bottom, surrender to this process for today, right? I beg of you not to just say to yourself this morning, oh, I've done a fourth step recently, I really don't, that's like going to the gym and just watching the TV, which I've done, by the way. So surrender to this process, and let's just see what happens today. Go through this work as though you've never done it. That's where the change happens. If I walk into some step work saying, I know what's going to happen, or I've done this before, there's no opportunity to have a new experience. When we did this, most of the time when I do this locally, I do it with an old dictionary. I like looking up the old words, but we didn't bring that today. But we're going to stop because a number of the definitions are really important. But at the bottom of 63, we've just taken this third step with our guy or our gal. And hopefully we're as surrendered as we'll ever be. We're ready to do some work. And the first time reference of when we should do this is right at the bottom of that page. Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Though our decision, what decision? This third step decision that we just took was vital and crucial, it could have little permanent effect unless at once, there's the second time reference, followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us, what we've been talking about. Liquor was but a symptom. We had to get down to causes and conditions. So at this point, I've already asked my guy to get a spiral notebook or a composite notebook like this. We're superstitious where we live. We get green ones because green is the color of growth. And I asked them to put their conception, as Scott talked about, on the inside of their spiral notebook.
Conception of God.
Conception of God, and the second step exercise in the inside of this book. I've got a couple, guys that like to do, I don't know if you sponsor people the way that I do, but I've got some guys that like to do things their way. And we always talk about, make sure your fourth step is, always with you, or, don't leave it laying out. And, because I learned that the hard way. I was, as I said, trying to put my life back together. I'm 18 years sober, and I'm going through this work, and I'm doing the sex inventory, and I'm coaching my son's football team, and we have this little Jeep, and we can drive the Jeep up on the practice field, and I got my notebook in the back, and it's the first day of practice, and this mother comes up. Every football team's got one of those mothers. She says, I'm going to be the team mom. I'm going to organize everything. Let's get a pad of paper out, and let me get all everyone's names and numbers and emails and stuff. I'm going to organize it. It's great. And I'm kind of like, maybe, across a little bit, and I hear my son says, well, here's a notebook, and I look over there, and they've got my four-step open on the hood of the Jeep, flipping through pages, Dad, who's Susie? He didn't really read it, but it was a disaster averted very closely. And just recently, Joe a friend of ours came up from Florida, and we're doing some stuff here, and this is how the phone conversation went. How's your, oh, she found it? She read it and found it. Oh, the lock didn't work anymore? Oh, she threw them out. She found his four-step and read it and threw them out. So keep your four-step to yourself. It's, at some point, some of those things you may wish to share with your significant other, but let's get through the work and make that decision with your sponsor. So, picking up on 64, it says, therefore we start off upon a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. And that tells me that this is not like a one-and-done thing. I don't do this every 10 to 15 years. Regularly is annually. Now, when I do this, once the first time I go, when a guy asks me to sponsor him, I take him all the way back through. Even if, a couple years sober, he says, I've done it, I say, we're going to pretend like you've never done this before. I can't assume that you've, I won't say done it the right way, but done it this way, because many people think they've done it this way and haven't. And so I can't assume that, in my mind, their life is on the line, right? Mine was. So we're going to go all the way back. But then the second and third years going through for just an annual cleanup, we just do the recent stuff, and it doesn't take long at all. I usually do mine, once a year on my way to Scott. Scott and I hook up for our anniversaries are close to each other, and we hook up and go fishing, and that's my kind of tradition of going there and do that. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and fact-facing process. It is an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. If the owner of the business will be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. Fair enough.
That get rid of is the second time it's used the phrase get rid of. I would observe on step 4, if all you do is write, you get rid of ink, paper, and time. And I don't think any of those are blocking you. They weren't blocking me. And it is the first indication that there are things other than writing involved in step 4. It has been my experience that it is those things other than writing that are the meat of step 4. I don't know that the writing portion has much effect at all. But these other things that are called for in step 4 are life-changing. And I put a little bait in the water there.
Yeah, for me, as most of us know, this inventory of this process, the 4th step, is divided into resentment inventory, a fear inventory, and what we like, you call a sex inventory. But there's many people that I know that I love and respect dearly who are great AAs who love doing the 4th step out of the 12 and 12. And I don't have an argument with that. In the 12 and 12, there's 26 or 28 questions. But for me, the difference is the relief in the 4th step in the big book comes in the prayers. That's where the transformation happens. And the 12 and 12 it's really just asking us to make some observations. But I'm not going to argue with anyone who feels differently.
And I would say also, I think there are an awful lot of really good and wonderful and right ways to go through this process out of this book with someone who's already done it. This is just what I do. That's all I'm sharing with you. Your sponsor's got you doing something different. I'm all about that. Fantastic. But I think it's important to work out of the directions. The big book is a set of directions on how to do the steps. The 12 and 12 says it's a series of essays on the steps. And I think for somebody who's been around for a while, it's probably a very good way to go through it. But someone who's new, I think you might want to give a hard look at the actual directions on it. And I think you'll see what we're talking about as we get into it.
In the middle of 64, it picks up where we just left off, again talking about the 3rd step. It says, in that middle paragraph there, being convinced that self manifested in various ways was what had defeated us. We've conceded that already in the 3rd step, that self was the problem. We considered its common manifestations. Resentment is the #1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. That's a pretty bold statement. From it stem half of the forms of spiritual disease. For we have not only been mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. Is that what your book says?
No. Mine says all.
Right. All forms. So it starts out here with a general instruction. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. It doesn't really tell me what or how to do that. And so right now, I ask my guy to underline or highlight, whatever you want to use, chalk, hieroglyphics. Put a 1 here, because when this is really, I think, just as important as taking a guy through this way is having him, giving him the understanding of how to take the next guy through. Because that's how these, I hate to use the word bastardized 4 steps happen, but that's what happens. you know, it's like that old elementary school game where 25 people sit in a circle and you whisper a secret to the left and you whisper a secret to the left, and by the time it comes all the way around, it's totally different. That's how the four-step turns into the, you know, sometimes a totally different process. So in dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. Great. So at this point, I'm going to ask you to open up your spiral notebook or your composite notebook, and so there's a piece of paper on each side, a left and a right. You've got two pieces of paper. I told everyone to get one, and I didn't get one. You don't need that.
What I like to do is on the inside, that first sheet, when you open, thank you. When you open it, you want to write something about, like, something subtle, like, this is my four-step. If I find you with it, I will kill you and hide your body. Something subtle, but that carries your message. And then you turn the page. Go ahead.
So you've got a piece of paper on the left, and you've got a piece of paper on the right. And the one that's on the left, kind of divide, make a line down on the left-hand side. You don't need to split the page in half. You're just going to put names on that first column. But we still have 4 columns here. And just number them 1, 2, and 3, and 4, just so we can talk to them and reference them about their numbers. At this point, I always like to tell my guys that let's give ourselves permission to do this poorly. That's my big blocking in doing anything, you know. You know, whenever my sponsor would say, hey, how's your 4-step coming? I'd say, well, you know, I'm kind of working on my 3rd step. If ever a new guy tells you he's working on his 3rd step, you know, that's a painful thing. Working on your 3rd step. What that means is I'm still running the show, and I'm waiting for the crash and burn to happen so that I can surrender. So we've got these 4 columns on your page, and here comes the first really specific instruction. And I know there's a lot of really experienced AA members here, much smarter than I am, sober longer than I am, and you're saying to yourself, well, Bill's got 3 columns here. I'm begging you just to hang on for a second. Remember that set-aside prayer. It's all going to make sense. Just bear with me. Let's stay in the present. So here's the instruction. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. People, institutions, and principles. So on that top of column 1 up here, write those 3 words, people, institutions, or principles. That's what we're going to list. And before you number down the page, we're going to need some extra space, so skip a line. On the left-hand side, number down the page. 1, skip a line. 2, skip a line. 3, skip a line. 4, skip a line. We're not going to leave here today with a finished 4-step, I promise you that. But I hope what you'll leave with is an understanding of this process at a much greater depth than you had. But we're going to practice doing this together, and those of you who do this the regular way, you know, do this way, it'll be a really good house cleaning. So we're going to number down the page and leave some space. And so let's take, you know, a minute or 2 and number down the page and list people, institutions, or principles. Scott?
Yeah, and let's observe what it said. I asked my new guy to erase the word resentment from his mind, because he knows he's not supposed to have any, so he's trying not to have any. He's going to be just like I was. He's going to work the promises and hope the steps come true. He's going to pretend to be this promise thing because he knows that's who he's supposed to be. He's not supposed to have resentment, so he's trying not to. So the book did not ask him for his resentments. It asks for a list. Lists are vertical, by the way. I've never seen a horizontal list. They run down the page. And we need a list of everything and everyone that's ever made you angry, ever, even if you're sure you've forgiven them. Even if you're absolutely certain you've forgiven them, we need a list. And he's saying this is going to be long. It better be.
Yeah, I think the key word there is were. It doesn't say we listed people, institutions, and principles with whom we are angry.
Yeah, whom we were angry.
We need to go back through our lives.
We need everything. And what I ask him to do is to just spit them. Just sit there and just puke them. Write a name, skip a line, write a name, skip a line. You don't write on the last line at the bottom of the page. When you get to the bottom, turn the page, write 1, 2, 3, 4 across the top and keep them coming. And then when they slow down on you, the page 65 says we went back to our lives. So that indicates a reverse chronology. I like to begin with just as fast as you can think of them. But when they slow down on you, think, okay, I live here now. I'm married to her. I work with these people. This is my home group. These are the guys I golf with. This is my church, whatever activities. So who in all of that has ever made me angry? But 8 years ago, I lived with, what was her name, and I was where, and so on, and go back through my life, searching for anything or anyone. And I also ask them to schedule. There are 168 hours in a week. If I've got an 8-hour week job and a 30-minute commute, that 45 hours gone. 8 hours of rest a night is 56 more. 16 hours for meetings. That includes some driving time. 3 hours for recreation, a round of golf, play some tennis. 2 hours to mow the lawn and do your melon list. You know the melon list. Honey, do this, honey, do that. It's the melon list. 5 hours to read spiritual literature, of which I will tell you what it's going to be. We're going to read this big book. 9 hours to watch TV. That's 3 ball games. That's enough, right, ladies? 3 hours to bathe and shave. 5 hours on the phone with me and some men whose names I will give you. You don't need to pick them. I'm going to pick them for you. I want you talking to guys I know that are doing this thing. Let's get you in the middle of a herd. You know, nobody ever fell out of the middle of anything. 12 hours to cook and eat for a week. 1 hour to shop for groceries and clothes, get a haircut. 3 hours for a date with your wife if you happen to still be sleeping in the big bed, or maybe coach a little league team. 5 hours for prayer and meditation. That's 165 hours gone out of your 168-hour week. You got 3 hours left. I want half. I want him to schedule 3 30-minute to 45-minute periods a week to work on his 4-step. And Monday, Wednesday, and Friday is not a schedule. Monday, 8 o'clock at night to 8:45, that is a schedule. Like anything else on the schedule, it's not subject to cancellation. It might have to move. Planning Saturday afternoon at 2, my son had a Little League game. I forgot all about it. Went to the Little League game, slipped it to 8 o'clock at night. No problem. I don't even need a phone call on that. I gave myself originally the assignment of completing a 4-step. It's a bad mindset, because then I'm a bad guy till it's done. Far, far better to agree with my sponsor how much time I should spend on the 4-step this week and do it that way. I can feel better about myself while I'm in process. And I think we felt bad long enough. John touched on it so beautifully. I tell him, we are not saving a special alcove in Akron at the AA Hall of Fame for your 4-step. You have my permission to do an absolutely lousy 4-step. Because if you have to do it perfectly, you can't do it at all. And our home group does not give a trophy every year for the best 4-step. And this is the trophy you are not going to get. All right, if you're too far back, it says 4-step trophy, never awarded. This is the trophy you ain't going to get. And this is all about permission not to do it permission to do it poorly. And you can have your picture made with the 4-step trophy. By the way, a lot of people do. The Russians went crazy over this. I'll leave it up here. And as soon as he has started his 4-step, I want to get my hands on it. And I give him his grade on the title page. It's a great big F- in red. That's part of the mindset that you're not going to do it perfectly. That's what that's all about. But to have it scheduled, then he can feel good about himself while he's in process. Just spit the names. And I used to give the first 3 instructions together. And if you do that, they don't. The book says a list, and lists work down a page. I've never seen a horizontal list. And if we do it vertically, one column at a time, it's much more analytical. If you write the name and what they did and what it affects coming across the page, it makes those things flare. It's a lot more analytical working vertically. And so I don't give him the second direction until he's finished the first one. And I want to know what his schedule is. He calls me every Sunday. And I have found that to be a very, very effective way to approach it. Also, at this point, I usually say to them, are you interested, are you wondering what color ink and what paper you should use? Half of them will say, yeah. On page 67, it says, we set them before us in black and white. That's not very specific. That doesn't say black ink and white paper. That could easily be black paper and white ink. I've had 4 of them go to the art store and get black paper and a 3-hole punch and a pen that wrote white ink. I've had 4 of them do it. They're all still sober today. These are my guys. I mean, they are just, I love that. And I think that's ridiculous, and I require it. And the reason is, the first time I let myself off the hook on the smallest detail, it might have been the one that would have saved my life. So I want to do it literally. And I think that makes it so easy for someone to do a 4-step when I give him just a little bite at a time. He can do that first column. That's all he needs to do. That's as hard as it gets.
Yeah, once I decide that I'm not going to do this part, I'm back in management. The only thing I've ever really disagreed about Scott in recovery about is this black and white part. There's no such thing. I'm in the printing business my entire life, and there's no such thing as white ink. So that's just a little caveat.
There you go. That's good. That's good. That's who I get to sponsor. It's the way it is. Yeah. And I'll tell you too. I work this program to the best of my willingness. And I would like to tell you a story. When Lombardi first started with the Packers, they weren't doing too well. And one spring training, they were not doing well at all. They did 2 practices a day. They called it 2-a-days, and he got mad at them and said, we're going to do 3-a-days. And one of the D-backs turned to his buddy and he said, he can work me long, but he can't work me hard. That so applies to my recovery. There are some people who can work me long, but I'm the only one who can work me hard. How important is this to you? You might want to work yourself hard here. I'd like to recommend that. So we're gonna write some names?
Yeah, let's take 1 to 2 minutes and make our list.
I need to get a pen. I don't have a black one. Hey, make sure it's black. I am. I got a green and 2 reds up here, and I got all kinds of stuff. I won't do it. No yellow paper, no blue ink. Can't do it that way. Not possible. And by the way, if you brought your cell phone, please set it on stun. If your phone goes off, you're going to buy ice cream for everybody, okay? That's the rules here. So you might want to take a look at it. I think I'll look at mine. Whoops. That was going to be bad.
Scott, this is usually when a guy asks, what does he mean by institutions and principles?
Institutions are things like a particular church. It's a real common one. A major political party. Those are institutions. Principles are kind of an interesting one. One of the principles that I had resentment against was the fact that I believed I wasn't good enough. And that's actually a principle. It's a false one. But it's beliefs. Sometimes beliefs that other people have. Eventually we're going to have to come back to people when we get further into this process, but that's it. I draw a line under it and it says anything or anyone that's ever made you mad, ever. You just go ahead and list all your family members, trust me. There should be at least one major religion, at least one major political party, some foreign governments and leaders, some teachers and schoolmates, neighbors, people who got their driver's licenses out of Cracker Jacks boxes. Yeah, they don't have that up here, I'm sure. I understand that cars in Tennessee are going to be cheaper than anywhere else. They're taking off some of the equipment we don't use. The turn signals are no longer going to be on the... so they'll be a little bit cheaper to buy in Tennessee.
What do you tell a guy that says, do I put myself on it?
On your resentment list?
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with you putting yourself on your resentment list. I don't want to see your name on your amends list. Okay, everybody got a few names?
Great. We kept talking over there a minute. I wanted to at least give a minute of silence, but I guess it's never going to happen with you up here. Okay. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. And if you look at Bill's column, over there on the opposite page, very similar. He's got some people down, and he's got his employer down. I always thought that when he was talking about principles, that he was kind of giving us a way to talk about religion without, you know, obviously in this work, he's very sensitive to religions and doesn't want to upset any religions. And in the fifth step, he talks about it's okay to, you know, when you have confession procedures to do that. And I always thought institutions was like the school or the IRS or the police department, but I think both of them are, doesn't matter, as long as it gets down on the paper is the name of the game. So here comes the second instruction. Get your highlight.
And only after he tells me he's gotten to his earliest memories. At this point, he's finished with column 1. Is it complete? Absolutely not. But it's complete enough for us to move on. At this point, I want him carrying writing materials all the time. You're going to be walking through the grocery store. He's going to look at the cantaloupes. His head looked exactly. Just write it down. We'll add it to the list. So as they continue to bubble up, we'll just add them. But when he gets to his earliest memories, going back to his life, we're done. We're moving on.
In my experiences, they also really start to bubble up once we start getting some relief from some of them. Mm-hmm. There's more room to deal with some of that stuff. So the second question, the second instruction is right here. We asked ourselves why we were angry, period, end of sentence. So highlight that, put a little 2 next to that. That's the second column. Very same words as Bill has in this example, the cause. And this is a really important part. I, for a long time, would give a 3-page essay here of why I was angry. And all that really did for me was stir the pot.
Yeah, it just feeds the resentment.
And if you see here, the first example, Mr. Brown, he's angry because his attention to my wife, he told my wife of my mistress, and Brown might get my job at the office. That's pretty 3 severe things. Messed up his marriage, he's messing with his mistress, and he's messing with his pocketbook. And he manages to describe this in, 19 words?
19 words. 19
words. And so we're going to limit this process to 19 words, no matter how terrible the offense is, no matter how big our resentment is. And a lot of us have some very valid reasons for resentment, right? A lot of us are hurts, and I want to be clear, a lot of us are victims of some terrible stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But my experience is that victims don't stay sober. We have to get past the victimhood, right? I love what Richard Rohr says, that if we don't learn to transform our pain, all we'll do is transmit it. And that's what I've been doing my entire life. So if it works for Bill, it's probably going to work for me. So we're going to limit these descriptions of the cause of why we were angry to 19 words.
Contractions count as 2 words. And so you have the line that the name is written on over to the break, and the entire line below it on which you can write 19 or fewer words. I also tell the guys I sponsor, if you've got somebody done more than Mr. Brown did, and you think you need to write the 20th word, call me and we'll talk about it. Right. We'll negotiate. I will tell you, I've never given up the 20th word. I've never been called. I mean, from what you've seen, if I was sponsor you wouldn't call me with that, would you? Well, they don't either. And I don't want them to, because they want. I had a girl from my home group called me one Sunday afternoon, and she was crazy. I said, what has happened? And she said, I had another fight with my boss on Friday, and I've been fourth-stepping about it all weekend. No, she hasn't. She's been hating him on paper all weekend. Very, very different from doing a 4-step. Very, very different.
It forces us to boil it down to causes and conditions.
Yeah, so my second column says, left me for another guy, screwed me in a business deal, left me for another guy, next to high school football coach, didn't play me as much as I deserved, left me for another guy. There'll be patterns. But it's brief. The shorter, the better. But 19 is absolute maximum. Don't write any more than that.
Let's see if we can be quiet for 2 minutes so they can write. So we got an idea what that looks like. As I said, we're not going to leave today with a complete 4-step, just an understanding of what we're supposed to do. The next sentence says, in most cases, it was found our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, ambitions, or personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore, we were burned up. And so right now, all we have is a grudge list. All we have is this list of reasons why we're doing angry. Why we've been angry. This does not bring any relief. On our grudge list, we said opposite each name are injuries. And so here's the instruction. Was it our self-esteem, security, ambitions, or personal or sex relations which have been interfered with? So on the top of column 3, this is a multiple choice question. I have my guy at the top of column 3 write those words. Was our self-esteem, our security, ambitions, personal or sex relations which have been interfered with? Put those on the top of column 3.
Some will only get 1, some will get 2 or 3, some will get all 5. Some you may not be able to figure out. Don't give yourself a brain hernia trying to figure it all out. I tell them, if it's not just real obvious to you, skip it, call me and I'll help you see why it's self-esteem. Because on my first 20 of these, self-esteem got the most ink. Yes, sir?
What's an example of an ambition?
You know, if
Get promoted at work,
Yeah.
and somebody screwed over you and someone else got the promotion.
or somebody takes your hot girlfriend.
Or somebody gave you a hot stock tip and it went down instead of up. Good questions.
I'm really excited to see everybody writing. This must be a really sick group.
This is really gratifying. Yeah. And this is as hard as it gets, by the way. We're pegging the needle here. This is as hard as a four-step gets. Never have heard anyone who's done the four-step this way talk about how hard it was. I've heard hundreds of people talk about how hard the four-step is that have never done one. What they're actually telling us is that not doing a four-step is very hard.
Right.
I pointed that out to one last weekend.
Most of the time they're talking about different types of inventory that are nothing
Yeah.
like the four-step.
Sometimes people ask me, because I have the privilege of doing this workshop a lot, what do I think about writing an autobiography? And I'll tell you, I think it's a fabulous idea. I hope you do it. I hope you do a four-step also.
Right. Whenever someone tells me, I've got my I got all the way to the four-step and I had 87 pages, I say, whoa, that's probably not talking about the same thing here. All right, so we've got these three columns. It should look very similar to what Bill has here in the book. And you know, during the morning here with doing this four-step workshop, if you've got a question, just throw up your hand and blurt it out. I don't want to wait till later. Chances are, if you're thinking it, someone else is thinking it. So at the bottom of 65 here, I know everyone wants to keep writing, but let's pause a second from the writing, because I said we're not going to finish today. Bill has these four different examples. And at the bottom of that page, he says, we went back through our lives. So there's another instruction of how thorough this should be. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. That's
a general description. They're going to tell us precisely how to consider it. I use the words considerations and observations interchangeably. And we're going to come through now a series of observations and considerations about the fourth step. This is a sales presentation. It's the best one I've ever seen.
Here we go, bottom of 65. The first thing apparent was this world and its people were often quite wrong. Amen.
Yeah, we're not going to spend much time on that. You've been sitting on bar stools with some of the other great philosophers of our era covering this very point for the last couple of decades. So we pretty well got an X in that square. Let's move on.
To conclude that others were wrong as far as most of us ever got. That's my story. Yeah. The usual outcome was the people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse and then we restored ourselves. But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. As in a war, the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived.
I'd like to stop and say, was that your experience? Yeah, most of us say yeah.
And this is just a silly observation, has no value, but Bill has this habit of writing, kind of telling us why we need to do something, tells us how to do something, and then tells us why we just did what we just did. And here he tells us why we do this. It is plain that, and Scott points out, I love when he does this, that 6 or 7 times on this page he tells us that resentments are going to kill us. Let's number them. It's plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness.
So I'd like to change that into a question. Have you ever seen anyone who was happy, joyous, free, and full of deep resentment? I don't believe I've ever seen that combination.
To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might be worthwhile.
Did you ever lay awake at night and hate them when you should have been sleeping? Did you ever sit in class and plan their demise when you should have been listening? Did you squander hours that might have been worthwhile? Is this true for you?
And I think that's, when I said, that my experience, this big book has never been wrong, I think that is wrong. I think it should, do we squander the days or months or years that might have been worthwhile?
Yeah. Ours is a little thin.
Yeah, it's an understatement.
Yeah.
But the alcoholic whose hope is maintenance of a growth of a spiritual experience, is that your hope? Is that what we're doing here?
Let's talk about what those words mean. Maintenance means two things. It means to maintain in the sense of not losing something I already have. It also means to maintenance in the same sense that I maintenance my vehicle. I rotate the tires, I've got the right pressure in them, I change the oil on time, I vacuum it out, I wash it. I maintenance my spiritual experience in the same sense. With daily prayer and meditation, I attend a lot of meetings. I take meetings into gated communities and treatment centers. I have a sponsor. I sponsor some guys. I do daily prayer and meditation. I read spiritual literature. I maintenance my spiritual condition. The same sense that I maintenance my vehicle.
So here comes the part where Bill really sells us. Let's see if he's serious about it. We found that it is fatal. That's one reference to our death if we don't do this. For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. And with us to drink is to die.
So we just killed you a couple of 3 times there in that. And this Jerry Crow I talked about, I just keep mentioning his name because he lived up here. He said that I hadn't seen him in several years. I'd moved on. I was 2 or 3 sponsors beyond him. And I ran into him and I said, I got to talk to you. Something that's really scaring me. And I named a guy. I said, do you remember this guy? And he said, yeah, if somebody you sponsor commits suicide, you'll remember them. And I said, I can't find the difference between me and Bill. We were members of the same group where I saw him several times every week. We were within a couple of months of the same sobriety date. We had the same sponsor, you. And he drove home from a meeting one night, sober over 2 years, and pulled into the garage and dropped the door and left it running and took his own life, sober 2 years. What's the difference between me and Bill? I can't see it. And he said, the difference is I could not get him to do a 4-step, and he died of resentment. It killed him. And I thought about that. It's exactly right. Every time you saw him, he could not wait to tell you what some SOB had just done to him. He was a perennial victim, and victims don't make it. We are in the process of stepping out of victimhood. We're not saying they didn't do that stuff. I'm saying I can't afford the price of carrying it. It says we found it's fatal. I know his name. I watched it.
If we were to live, we had to be free of anger.
So this is only for the ones that want to live. Everyone else can take a short break.
The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us.
I think it's probably, for me, the most misunderstood sentence in the entire book. I'm told that about the time this book was being written, one of the most creative men of the 20th century would set his team down around a table. And you'd have an idea, and you'd have one, and that'd make you think of something, and then Ben would come up with the thing we would wind up doing. And Walt Disney labeled his process brainstorming. Has absolutely nothing to do with the word brainstorm written on this page. In the 1930s dictionary that I looked up, the word brainstorm, it said transient, violent mental outburst. That's rage. Brainstorm and rage are synonymous. So if you will put it in context, there are 2 kinds of anger. There's the grouch or the slow burn, and the brainstorm, rage, a detonation. It's important to find out what the words mean.
They may be the dubious luxury of normal men.
God, is that thin?
But for alcoholics, these things are poison.
Yeah, you died again.
You died again. We turn back to the list for it held the key to the future.
Does that mean if I don't find the key to the future, I don't have a future? Yes, it does. You just died again. It was subtle, but you died.
We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle.
Okay, let's talk about what that means. If you'll imagine a courtroom, we have been sitting at the prosecution table. We have the list of the accused, column 1. We have their crime, column 2. We have how it affected our poor innocent victim, column 3. If I'm going to look at it from an entirely is more than half, an entirely different angle, I'm going to have to walk across the courtroom and sit at the defense table and say, if I'd had his life, if my father had bashed me like his did, if I'd been fired, if my wife had, if my boss had, if, on my worst spiritual hair day, could I have done what he did? I will tell you right now, there is no lower limit to what I could have done. There is no bottom. And this is the beginning of the forgiveness process. And for me, it is the most important thing we do. We close a lot of meetings with a prayer that says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive. I believe that says, God, if I don't forgive them, don't you forgive me. I'm asking to be graded by my own standards. And Jerry said, what you really want is mercy for yourself and justice for everybody else. And the package is mercy for everybody or justice for everybody, and you are part of everybody, and you get to choose. And I cannot face justice. And I have therefore chosen mercy for everyone. All those who harmed me, everyone. Because I'm part of everyone. Powerful, powerful, powerful stuff.
We began to see the world as people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real.
Fancied?
I love that part.
Does that mean some of this just happened inside my head?
Most of it.
Mm-hmm.
Had the power to actually kill. Oh, we're dead again.
Guess who died?
How could we escape? We saw these resentments must
be mastered. Do you see it? We've just killed you 7 times on this page. I've been a sales rep for a long time. A good salesman will never mention price till he's established value. We just killed you 7 times with your resentments on this page. Is that sufficient value for you to pay a very high price? I hope so, because it's high. We're going to ask you to do some things you are not going to want to do.
We could not wish them away any more than alcohol.
That's the first indication of something I believe for a long time. In the English language, there are 2 kinds of verbs. There are transitive verbs and passive verbs. Transitive is something I do, like I could give Ben this pen. Passive is something that happens to me. And in the English language, the verb to forgive is transitive. It's something I do. That's not my experience. Forgiveness isn't something I can give. It's not something I can do. It's something I have to receive. And we're at the beginnings of the process of opening me up to receive the gift of not hating any of you anymore. It's not something I'm able to do for myself. And this, for me, is the most powerful. I think it's a little bit more important than life or death. Forgive us our trespasses as. I can't afford the price on that day of having my soul standing naked before my Creator, guilty of hating some of His other children. That's a price I can't pay. And this process has taken me from a list of about 200 or 300 people that I hated to today's current balance. I was able to write down 2 names, and the fact is, I don't really hate either one of them. And I don't hold myself as a shining example. I am not one. I'm telling you, this is a process that absolutely works. It will change you. When I talk about digging the poison out of your soul, that is precisely what we're in the process of doing.
Are we on 50-minute sessions?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We're not going to get into the next instruction, but I want to read the next part before we take a break. This was our course. And I love how that's worded. And if you just throw a word in it, if you consider this is our job, this is our goal, to realize that people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way they disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. That sentence blew me out of the water. Too, T-O-O. So if they're spiritually sick, what Bill is saying is that perhaps I'm spiritually sick too. So my entire life, as Scott just talked about, I've been asking God to punish you, but I want forgiveness. It's as childish as it gets, right? Like, I hope your car crashes and burns with you in it, but I want a brand new Mercedes, you know. And the fact is that, you know, some of the things I've done are far worse than what they've done. Yeah. It's just as childish. There's no more childish notion to think that I deserve forgiveness, but you don't.
We're going to be doing questions and dumb looks. He said questions and answers, but we can't. I don't want to overpromise. I got a hat here. If you got questions for us down the 4th step, we want to be interrupted. But anything else you got a question, drop them in the hat. We're going to count the last session. Take a break. Smoke them hard. We'll see you in about 9.5 minutes.